In this video, I'm going to show you high frequency separation, a really powerful retouching technique. You can download this image. There's a link in the description to get it for free. So I'm going to show you how to take this image and create this one. So in addition to high frequency separation, I'm also going to cover some black and white conversion situations and the professional refinement to finish the image.
Yes! Are you ready? It's Photoshop time, and you know the drill. Smack it, whack it, and crack-a-lack it.
Yes! That's awesome! What?
So the thing about today's digital lenses is they are incredibly sharp. That's really true if you're buying big sensors with high quality lenses. You're just able to capture literally the pores on a person's face. So let's start. You have your original image. Essentially just hit Command or Control J twice. That's going to duplicate your image for you. So I'm going to double click on the top one and name it texture. I'm going to double click on this layer 1, name it blur. I'm going to turn off the visibility of the texture layer. And while I'm still selected on the blur layer, I'm going to go up to filter, down to blur, and over to Gaussian blur. I just want to drag the radius until the skin texture disappears, and then I'll back it back up. And this is going to vary depending on your particular image. This image is a 57 megabyte capture, so it's a really high res image. So I might have to go up more than you would if you have like a 20 megabyte capture. Okay, see now see how it looks just totally blurry. Like I see zero skin texture at all. So I'll come back down. Do you see how I'm seeing the highlights and the shadows of the texture itself? That's about where I want to be. I'm gonna click OK. I'm gonna turn on the visibility for the texture layer. I'm gonna select the texture layer. And here's where the magic happens. I'm gonna go up to Image and down to Apply Image. So likely, once your Apply Image dialog box opens, your settings will probably look something like this. So right away, the source is this image file, right? You can see the name of it up in the tab. The layer that we're choosing to keep the texture from, because essentially that's what we're doing. We're trying to keep all of the texture and subtract it from the layer that has all the blurred color and tone. So under layer, go choose the one that is the blurred color and tone. I'm going to choose the blur layer here. Now we want to subtract the texture from the color. So come all the way down to subtract. Now here's the important part, the scale and the offset. Essentially set your scale to 2 and you want to change your offset to mid-gray. Remember in an 8-bit file, the RGB values go from 0 pure black to 255 pure white. So 128 is right in the middle of those 256 color and tones. So hit 128. So once that's been applied, you should have this gray file where you see the texture. Come up to the layer blend modes and go down to linear light. And what I'm going to do just to show you, I'm going to select the blur layer, hit Command or Control G to put them in a group, just so they're all together and I can toggle them on and off quickly. When I turn this visibility off, you shouldn't see a difference. And see, it's off. There's the original. There's what we did. There's the original. There's what we did. The reason there's no difference is because we have the exact same image up here. So we have the blur layer, which has all the color and tone, and then we have the texture. So we just need now to blend these together a bit. So once you have it at this point, I'm going to select the blur layer. I'm going to come over to the lasso tool right here. And essentially, I'm going to select the areas to equalize. So I'm just going to kind of draw around like tones, like this highlight on the cheek. I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And then I get a live preview. You see how this really darkened up when I blurred it a lot? I don't need to blur it that much. This highlight on the nose right here, I'll select that. Now here's something else to consider. If it's looking sharp, it's probably because your feathers set at 0 pixels, which is the default. If you'll hit Q, which is the quick mask. It's the same thing as toggling this icon right here. It does a red overlay and it shows you exactly what you selected. And do you see how this line is pretty sharp? All you have to do is come hover over the word feather. Your cursor will change into a scrubby slider and just drag it over until it looks feathered enough, usually between 20 and 40, depending on how big of a selections you're making. Now here's the thing, are you noticing as I drag this over, nothing's changing? That's because you can't vary the feather of a selection while it's actually active unless you go into the select and down to modify, which we can't even access these tools while we're in quick mask mode. So watch, I'll hit Q to exit quick mask mode. Then I can go to select, modify, and then we can feather. but it's just much easier just to go ahead and reset your feather before you and just redraw it like this. Hit Q for quick mask mode. Do you see how soft that is? That really is blending it in really nicely. So Q to get out of quick mask mode, go up to filter, blur. And if you're going to become a part-time and or professional retoucher, consider setting up a keyboard shortcut key for the Gaussian blur. That way you just have to type one thing and it immediately pops back in. It allows you to very quickly edit your images. So you don't have to hit Command or Control D to deselect. Just by starting a new selection, you automatically deselect the previous selection. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and maybe the shadow area right here. And if you want, if you're not making huge adjustments and they're all similar, you can just reapply the very last Gaussian blur you did. Do you see how it's basically lowering the contrast of the areas? Okay, so you get the idea of how that works. But we still have this texture layer, right? Here we've got to make some considerations. We probably want to lower the texture of the face while still keeping some of the texture. So just go up to the texture layer and pull the opacity down until you still see the texture, but it's not so dominant in the image. But you don't want to pull it so far that now it's looking super blurry, right? So it's really a to taste. I would probably pull this texture down around 50 to 60% because it's okay to have some texture. And remember, we are looking at the image at 100%, which is really a large image considering how high of a resolution it is. But if you want to retain all the sharpness that you had, like in the texture you had in the teeth and the eyelashes and the eyes and the eyebrows and jewelry and hair, a technique is to hit Command or Control J on the texture so that you've duplicated the texture. So now we have like double the texture. But remember, if you hold down the Alt or Option key while you click Add Layer Mask, this third icon on the bottom of the Layers panel, it will add a black mask. And remember, black conceals anything on that layer. White reveals anything on that layer. I'm now going to hit the B for the brush. I'm going to look at my foreground background and make sure it's white. If it's not, I can click this little double pointer here and toggle between them, or I can hit the letter X. Always take a quick look at the top toolbar whenever you choose a new tool, just to make sure your settings are where you want them. For the brush tool, I want it currently in normal, and I want to make sure my opacity is at 100%, meaning I'm basically cutting a hole in this mask when I pass over the eyelashes and the teeth and lips. I'll make my brush smaller, typically the edge of the nose holes, the eyebrows, space bar to temporarily get the hand tool so I can pull my image down so I can see it. Right bracket key to make my brush larger. This hair is actually blurry anyway from the shallow depth of field. And I'll come down to the dress, right bracket key to make it bigger, just to make the texture in the dress a little more apparent. A lot of times jewelry is important to portrait clients. Make sure that's sharp. But yeah, jewelry, hair, parts of the eyes, and I'll toggle that off so you can see the difference. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to toggle off everything we've done. So before, after. Do you see how your eye adjusts to it? So we've definitely softened the texture of the skin. I'm going to hit Command or Control 0 to push it down. And now I'm just going to add a black and white adjustment layer right here for a quick black and white conversion. Now looking at this image in black and white, there are some things I want to address. But first, let's go ahead and make our luminance value changes. I know reds and yellows are in every skin tone, regardless of race. So I'm going to start with my reds and yellows. I wouldn't mind really drawing attention to the person. I want to separate the subject from the background, so I'll make her brighter. Now I'm going to push everything to its own layer, and here's why. I want to have control over this image now as its own unique thing. I'm going to hit Command, Option, Shift, letter E. That merges everything we've done to the top layer. Now look at the image as it stands. I don't want to constrict myself to the format of the sensor. I think this would actually look better as a 4:5 crop ratio. And what I mean by that is essentially there's too much negative space above the person's head. It's putting her head a little too close to the proximity of the middle of the image. I think everything above this diagonal line is almost purposeless to the image. It's not making it stronger. So what I would do is I would tap the crop key or hit the letter C, and I wouldn't choose a ratio of 1:1, which remember Photoshop has sticky settings. It's going to remember the last thing you did. But I would like to choose 4:5, which would give you a nice crisp 8:10 image or 16:20, and then click inside and drag the image to where you want it. And I would say I'd pull this in just a touch, throwing her up in the above the upper rule of thirds for traditional photographic composition rules, which they work for a reason, because I think this made this a much stronger image visually, because we've already had some good things happening. The photographer chose a long lens, a very shallow depth of field to make sure the background is out of focus, really isolating the subject for the viewer. That's all we're doing. We're further enhancing that by removing roughly 30%, 40% of the image that had nothing to do with the portrait. Our eye is going to go to the widest, brightest area of a print or the most sharply focused. For me, I keep coming to the palm of the hand and this little white spot on the very edge. Let's get rid of those. So first I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp tool, which is right here. Alt Option click where this bullseye is, which is telling Photoshop I want to paint from this spot. And then I'll just pull over and paint that out. Now we need to lower the intensity of this palm. Oh, there are so many ways to do it, but we're going to do it with adjustment layers. So I'll come up to the curves adjustment layers, this third one over. A lot of people are afraid of curves, but it's not super complicated at all. Think of it like a dimmer switch. Like if the dimmer switch is down, right? Like it's the one of the toggle kind that you just slide up and down. If it's all the way down, that means it's off, which is pure black. If you dial it all the way up, that's pure white. So that's all we're doing. But instead of one dimmer, essentially this bar gives us 256 dimmers. And each dimmer controls a specific tone in the image. So this dimmer controls all of the blacks in the image. And I can make the black values go up so there's no pure black. Or as you saw, I can make them go totally white. And this dimmer on the far right side, as indicated by the triangle, controls all the pure white. So I can make the pure whites come down, which is essentially what I want to do, right? This was super bright. So I just want to pull down the brightness intensity on that hand. And once I've done that, and I have a white mask, remember, white reveals, black conceals. So essentially, I want to hide this effect on everything but the palm. So I'll hit Command or Control I. It's the exact same thing as going up to Image, Adjustments, and then all the way down to Invert. It's just much quicker. So that hit everything we just did. I still have white in my foreground. B for the brush tool. I'm painting at 100%. I'll hover over the word opacity and maybe drag down to 50% for my first pass. And then I'll just make a pass over the palm just to bring down the bright intensity of it. I haven't let go of my mouse yet, which means I'm only applying 50% of that power. Right bracket key to make my brush a touch bigger. And then I'll come in again at a second 50% pass for the brightest areas of the palm. And then maybe a couple clicks right up there. And I'll toggle that on and off. Because remember, our eyes are going to quickly adjust because of the Munker white illusion, if you've watched that video of mine. And it will deceive us. So you always want to toggle off what you've done. Like, oh, wow, that was really bright. Okay, now that looks too dark. But then look at it a minute and you're like, okay, that looks better. But as always, if you go too far, which again, better to go too far because you can very quickly go to the opacity of that adjustment and just lower it. It's like, I only want 88, 84% of that adjustment. I don't want it to be muddy, but I just don't want it to be so bright. Okay, so now we're getting there, right? As a general image, I want to do some things to this now. And I want it to be its own image again. So remember, what is that keyboard shortcut to merge everything we've done to the top layer? Command Option Shift letter E. That's Control Alt Shift letter E for Windows users. Now everything we've done is at the very, very top. Okay, so staying in Photoshop, I want to tweak this image. So I want to make her brighter. So I'll add a curves adjustment layer. And let's say I want to make her face brighter because that's where I want the viewer to look at the most. So I'll put a point in the midtones and I'll just pull the midtones up just to make her a touch brighter. So now that I've done that, obviously that's too powerful. I'll hit Command or Control I to invert the mask to hide everything. I still have white in my foreground. I'm still on the brush tool. I'll hold down the right bracket key to make my brush super big. My opacity is about 52%, and I'll just click once, like a spotlight. 1 click, 2 clicks, 3 clicks. Yeah, I think 3 clicks is going to work. If I hit Command or Control minus to shrink my image in a bit so I can see the corners really well. Now maybe I go the opposite way. Add a curves and maybe pull down my midtones. And then I'll take this mask that we've already created, hold down the Alt or Option key, click on it, drag it up to the white mask, and it's going to say, do you want to replace the layer mask with the one you just drug up? And I'll say yes. The reason we held down the Alt or Option key is because it copied it. Okay, now it made an exact copy, so now we're basically darkening the exact same thing we just lightened. So we need to invert that mask. And you do that. How do you do that? Remember? Command or Control I to invert. So now, do you see that? So now we're only allowing the dark parts to come through wherever the white is here. So now we vignetted the background while keeping a spotlight on the model. I'll hit Command Option Shift letter E just so we can start grouping some things and seeing them together. I'll select that one. I'll come all the way down to here, hit Command or Control G just to hide everything. Gives us a simple palette. I'm gonna come back down to the background layer, hit Command or Control J, and I'm gonna hit Command Shift U, which just is a very quick desaturation method. Because I want to show you, here's where we were and here's where we are. Which one do you like better? Consider adding a color tone to your image. You can do this a simple way is to go up to the hue saturation adjustment layer and just click on colorize and drag the hue slider to whatever you want, whether you want to make a Van Dyke looking image, a cyanotype, or maybe you want something really warm like a sepia tone. And I think something really warm could be perfect for this image. And the key is you can either leave it a very heavy tone. I tend to gravitate towards a very low saturation. So it's just the slightest hint of a warm black and white. I think it gives it a really nice look. Hit Command 1 to view it 100%. I'll push all that to its own layer so that I can turn all of these eyeballs off. And I'll toggle, here's where we were. And here's where we are now. Classic portrait retouch. I hope this helps. Can't wait to see what you make.
Yes!
Hey, what are you still doing here? It's over. Actually, all kidding aside, I hope this video helped. And if it did, consider subscribing. I like subscribers.
That's awesome! What? You just took one in the jugular, man! Whoa! Yes! Oh my god, I did! This is...
Hey, you stayed to the end. You know what that means? You're awesome. I'm talking about you. Now get out of here.